Disney Lorcana is a brand new trading card game that has just come out. And I, as the canny content creator man that I am, decided in my pure self-interest to try the game out because it looked fun. And I wanted to share with all of you what that was like so you can maybe make a better decision on whether you should try the game yourself. This is not going to be a how to play, but merely a how it felt for me to play as a longtime Magic the Gathering player, and maybe you, as a Magic the Gathering player or just gamer in general who has maybe dabbled in Magic the Gathering, would like to kind of know what it felt like to play. Now, to the game itself. I will say that Disney Lorcana was very easy to learn, very satisfying to play, and overall a lot of fun. Let's just get that out of the way right off the bat. It was really cool playing with Disney characters. The cards seemed well designed. It seemed fairly interesting. There were complex decisions to be made, even though it wasn't as interactive as Magic the Gathering. But it was a fun game and a good experience. I will say that one of the main differences between Lorcana and Magic the Gathering is that in Lorcana, many of your spells double as lands, because the way lands work is just like a giant chunk of your spells can be used as mana. And you just play them as basic lands and they just become lands, essentially. And so that meant that I never had mana problems. I never got mana screwed. I never got mana flooded. I almost always just had the exact amount of lands that I wanted to play the spells that I wanted. And that doesn't mean that everything always lined up perfectly, because there is always a decision because of this on whether or not to play something as a land or whether or not to hold it so I can cast it as a spell later. And that's where a lot of the fun came in, because I had this constant decision. Do I play this as a land and then regret it later, essentially? Or do I play this as a land because this is a garbage card that I never want to cast and I never want to see it again because it'll be face down for the rest of the game? But basically, there's always this tension in Magic the Gathering where it's like, okay, I've drawn too many lands, or oh, I've drawn too few lands, or oh, I've drawn lands the wrong color. And that is completely gone in Lorcana, and it makes it very, very user-friendly. You just play your things. You can always guarantee you're going to hit your next land drop if you really need to play your 4-drop on time, pretty much, because almost every card you draw is going to be a mana. Now, the next thing I want to know, is this game interactive? Because most games that are fun have some sort of user interaction. It's not like, okay, we're going to be two ships passing in the night. We're both going to do our thing, and if one of us does it better, it's like a solo game, essentially, and a race against the other person. It did feel quite interactive, because the way that you win the game is by sending your creatures on these quests. But when you send your creature on a quest, it can then be attacked by your opponent's creatures, and then when your opponent's creatures attack yours, or you can then send yours to attack them back. And so you get to this point where it's like, well, I sent my guys on a couple quests in the early turns, but now I really don't want to send them on quests because my opponent's guys are like thugs out there that are going to steal their lunch money. And if they go on quests, I have my own group of thugs that are going to take their lunch money. And so then the game enters this grindy phase where it's like, well, if I do this, he'll do this. If I do this, he'll do this. It's like a game of chess because there's a bunch of revealed information. But the stuff in hand is also somewhat unrevealed because maybe they'll play a new card that changes the race drastically, or they'll play a card that you can't attack, or stuff like that. And so it felt very satisfying to play on that front. And I was worried that there wasn't going to be enough interaction, but it felt like there was quite a bit of interaction. In some respects, it was really hard to interact with some aspects of the game. So if a creature never wanted to go on a quest and had a very powerful static effect, that felt really hard to beat. And I think a lot of those cards were higher rarity. And so that is somewhat based on the fact that I was playing starter deck gameplay, where I had a couple of really strong cards. So when I drew those, it felt really, really good. But if you're playing a more powered up version, let's just say in Magic terms, a standard deck versus a pre-con deck, where you have 4 copies of each rare versus just one, it's like, okay, everyone's going to be doing powerful things. And so we all kind of have this chess game we're playing, instead of okay, I drew my rare and he didn't. It was all of a sudden a little bit harder for him to compete on the board, though by no means impossible. Anyway, that is the general impression of the gameplay. Now on to something I like to call the wallet effect, or how expensive it is to play the game. And from my general understanding, there's no wildly expensive cards in terms of Magic the Gathering terms, no hundreds of dollars cards. There are a few cards that'll cost you a decent chunk. There's one card I faced today that was worth $50. I know because my opponent told me it was worth money, so I looked it up later because the card was absolutely absurd. It was some Rapunzel variant that absolutely decimated me, and when he played it, I was like, that can't possibly be right. That's so much better than every card in my deck. That's insane. And I imagine that that's the sort of experience you'll have in any game if you play against a high-powered deck, like the experience of bringing a standard deck to play against a modern deck in Magic the Gathering if you've never played Modern before. And you're just like, well, that card's absolutely absurd. I don't understand what's happening right here. But I feel like those cards were relatively rare. There was only one or two real cards that really felt that way. And I think most of the cards are relatively inexpensive, between at the top end, $20, and most of them are not very expensive at all. And so I felt like the game was probably relatively easy to get into from a budget perspective. Though I will say that the opponent I played against that had the expensive card, they'd gotten it just from opening some packs, and they had like swapped out like 12 cards from the starter deck. That like me and him had the same starter deck to start with, and he'd swapped out like 12 cards because he'd gotten some booster packs at this event and some at other events. And that felt like a meaningful difference where I almost won one game, but it wasn't particularly close in a lot of the games because he just had like slightly better cards, and the slightly better cards did make a difference, even if those slightly better cards were like slightly better commons compared to my commons. But so I did feel like optimized gameplay is always going to be different from like non-optimized in terms of like, okay, there's an actual deck that had some thought put into it versus a pre-con, but I did feel like competitive, which is something that I did enjoy. And playing pre-con against pre-con, when it was a balanced playing field, it was very satisfying, and it felt like there was a lot of decision-making to go on. Now, do I think the game could be like taking over tournament scenes? I don't know how much of a tournament scene there would be. I will say that the tournament I was at wasn't particularly well organized. It was more of like a casual play event where it was like, okay, everyone has a deck, find someone to play against. And that's very different from like FNM or Friday Night Magic. But I will say that the game was fun to play, and everyone seemed to be having fun, and it was very simple to learn. And so those are the main points in its favor. The Disney theme was awesome. Knowing the lyrics to all of the songs doesn't actually give you an in-game benefit, but it did give me a personal benefit to be like, aha, I can sing all of the lyrics to that Disney song. And yeah, so that is going to do it for this review. Final thought is give it a shot if you have the opportunity to, and a good place to play, because I really did find it enjoyable, but that might just be because I love new puzzles and I love card games, and overall a lot of it was very, very satisfying. But that's going to do it for this video. If you made it all the way to the end, leave hashtag new to Lorcana in the comment section down below. I will happily answer any of your questions, even though I am a noob myself. I will give it my best shot. And I would be happy, and I would really actually enjoy hearing your experiences of the game as well, because that's something that I just enjoy chatting about, and it would be cool to hear other perspectives. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time.